Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The old house groaned around me, a familiar symphony of creaks and sighs that usually lulled me into a sense of quiet companionship. But that afternoon, with the sky outside the color of a bruised plum and the wind picking up, every sound seemed amplified, echoing the hollow feeling in my chest. My husband, David, had been gone for 3 years, and the silence he left behind was a tangible thing, a presence I wrestled with daily. Being home alone wasn't new, but sometimes, like that day, the solitude felt less like peace and more like a spotlight on my aloneness. I was Sarah, 57 years young as I liked to tell myself, though some days the young part felt like a bit of a fib. I was in the kitchen, trying to lose myself in the methodical rhythm of kneading dough for a loaf of bread, flour dusting my worn apron. That's when I saw him. Mr. Henderson. James, he'd asked me to call him after his wife passed last spring, was in his backyard. Our properties were separated by a low, somewhat dilapidated picket fence, more symbolic than a real barrier. He wasn't gardening, which was his usual afternoon pastime. He was standing quite still, looking not at his prize-winning roses, but over the fence, towards my house. Towards me. There was an intensity in his gaze that made my hands pause in their work. James was a quiet man, always polite, with kind eyes that held a hint of old sorrow, much like my own, I suspected. We'd exchanged pleasantries, condolences, a shared cup of sugar here and there, but nothing more substantial. Now he was just watching, and a prickle of unease ran down my spine. It wasn't that I felt threatened, not exactly. It was more unsettling. The way he was looking felt personal, like he was seeing more than just the middle-aged woman making bread. I wiped my floured hands on my apron, a nervous habit, and offered a tentative wave. He didn't wave back immediately. He just held my gaze for another moment, a long drawn-out second where the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then he nodded slowly and raised a hand, not in a wave, but more like a beckoning gesture. He wanted me to come over. My heart gave a little flutter, a mixture of apprehension and a strange sort of curiosity. What could he possibly want? The dough sat forgotten on the counter. I found myself walking towards the back door, drawn by that quiet summons. The air outside was charged, heavy with the promise of a storm. As I approached the fence, James met me there. He was a tall man, still sturdy, with a weathered face that spoke of a life lived outdoors, full of both sunshine and storms. His silver hair was a little unruly in the wind. "Stara," he said, his voice a low baritone, softer than I expected, yet it carried easily over the rustling leaves. "Forgive me for staring. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "Oh no, it's all right, James," I replied, trying for a breezy tone that didn't quite match the tremor in my own voice. "Just surprised me a little. Everything all right?" He leaned against the fence, his expression serious, those kind eyes searching mine. "I was wondering if I might ask something of you. Something a little unusual." There it was. The unusual. A little knot tightened in my stomach. "Unusual how?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "I was in my attic earlier, sorting through Martha's things." His voice softened at her name. "And I found something. Something I think she would have wanted. Well, it's hard to explain." He paused, and the silence stretched, filled only by the whistling wind. He seemed to be wrestling with his words. "It's just that, you being home alone, and me. Well, me being alone too. Sometimes things take on a different meaning, don't they?" My breath caught. The way he said "home alone" didn't feel accusatory or creepy, but it highlighted a shared vulnerability. Still, the vagueness of his request was making me anxious. What could he have found, and what did it have to do with me? The word terrifying hadn't formed in my mind yet, but a definite sense of stepping towards an unknown precipice was there. It was the unknown, the not knowing, that was starting to feel significant. He continued, his gaze steady on mine. "It's nothing untoward, Sarah. I promise you that." "Absolutely not. But it requires a certain openness and perhaps a bit of courage." Courage? What on earth could he be talking about? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more outlandish than the last. Was he going to ask for help with something heavy? Unlikely, given his build. Was it something to do with Martha's passing that he couldn't handle alone? Perhaps. But the way he was framing it, the emphasis on unusual and courage, made it feel much more personal, much more direct. "James," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you're being very mysterious." "What is it?" He gave a small, almost sad smile. "I understand my hesitation might be unsettling. Perhaps terrifying is too strong a word for what I'm about to propose, but it will challenge your comfort zone, as it has mine in even deciding to ask. It's an experience, Sarah. One I believe Martha, in her own way, orchestrated for someone like you, someone with a good heart, a resilient spirit. It's about sharing a memory, a very specific, very vivid memory of hers, and I can't do it alone. It needs to be witnessed, understood, perhaps even felt by someone else." My heart was pounding now. Sharing a memory? How? What did that even mean? The air crackled with unspoken things, with the weight of his grief and my own loneliness, and with this utterly baffling proposition. He was asking me to step into something deeply intimate, something connected to his late wife, and the sheer unexpectedness of it, the vulnerability it implied from him, and would demand from me, was indeed starting to feel terrifying. Not in a way that made me want to run screaming, but in a way that made the ground beneath my feet feel suddenly unsteady. It was the terror of the deeply personal, the fear of an emotional exposure I hadn't anticipated, certainly not from my quiet, reserved neighbor. He saw the hesitation in my eyes, the fear I couldn't quite mask. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "But the storm is coming, and somehow it feels appropriate. If you're willing, just come next door. I'll make some tea, and I'll explain. The worst that can happen is you say no, and we go back to being polite neighbors. But I have a feeling, Sarah, that this might be something important for both of us." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once and turned, walking slowly back towards his house, leaving me standing by the fence, the wind whipping my hair around my face, my mind a whirlwind of fear, curiosity, and an inexplicable pull towards the unknown. The dough, I knew, would be ruined. But suddenly, bread felt like the least important thing in the world. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the first fat raindrops beginning to splatter against the dry leaves on the ground. His back porch light flickered on, a warm, inviting glow against the bruised twilight. He was waiting. The word terrifying echoed in my head, but it was now intertwined with another, much quieter word. Important. He thought this could be important. What if he was right? My hand went to the latch on the rickety gate in the fence, the cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat in my palm. It was a simple gate, rarely used. Opening it felt symbolic, like stepping across a line I hadn't even realized existed between my quiet, solitary world and whatever lay beyond James Henderson's back door. My kitchen, when I glanced back at it, looked small and safe, but also confining. The half-kneaded dough on the counter was a symbol of my routine, a routine that suddenly felt suffocating. James had offered an alternative, something unusual, something that required courage. Maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what I needed. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but alongside it, a tiny seedling of anticipation was taking root. What if this terrifying thing was actually a door, not to danger, but to something else, something that might finally break the monotony of my grief? With a deep breath that tasted of rain and courage I hadn't known I possessed, I pushed open the gate. The short walk across his lawn, which was noticeably neater than mine, felt like miles. Each step was a conscious decision, a movement away from the predictable and towards. Well, that was the question, wasn't it? His back door was a simple wooden affair, painted a cheerful blue that seemed at odds with the somber sky. I could hear the faint clinking of a cup against a saucer from within. He was making tea, just as he said. That small, normal sound was strangely reassuring. I raised my hand, hesitated for a beat, then knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been standing right there. James looked at me, and the relief in his eyes was palpable, mixed with a gentle warmth that seemed to chase away some of the chill of the impending storm. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in out of the rain." His kitchen was a mirror of mine in layout, but it felt different. Warmer, perhaps, or just filled with a different kind of history. Martha's presence was everywhere, not in a shrine-like way, but in the small, homey touches. The embroidered tea towels, the collection of whimsical salt and pepper shakers, the faint, lingering scent of cinnamon and something floral I couldn't quite place. It wasn't a sad place. It felt lived in, loved in. "The tea is almost ready," he said, gesturing towards a small kitchen table set for two. "Earl Grey. I hope that's all right." "Lovely," I managed, finding my voice. I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The initial terror had subsided into a kind of nervous expectancy. Now that I was here, the ambiguity felt less threatening, more like the preface to a story I was surprisingly eager to hear. He poured the tea, his movements careful and deliberate. He placed a cup before me, then his own, before sitting opposite. The steam curled up between us, carrying the fragrant aroma of bergamot. For a moment, we just sat in silence, the only sounds the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock from another room and the increasing drumming of rain against the window panes. "So," I began, feeling the need to break the silence, "Martha's things. You found something." James nodded, taking a slow sip of his tea. His eyes, when he looked at me, were clear and direct. Yes, it was a journal. Not a diary of daily events, but different. She called it her memory box. He paused, a faint smile playing on his lips. Martha was always a bit whimsical, a bit magical in her thinking. A memory box. It sounded intriguing. And what kind of memories did she keep in it? I asked, my curiosity piqued. She wrote about moments, he explained, his gaze drifting towards the window, as if seeing something beyond the rain-streaked glass. Moments she wanted to preserve, not just as facts, but as feelings, sensations. She had a way with words, Sarah. She could make you feel the sun on your skin, taste the salt in the air, hear the music in a crowded room, even if you'd never been there. I could appreciate that. David had been more of facts and figures man. I was the one who always tried to capture the feeling of things. "That sounds like a wonderful treasure to have," I said softly. "It is," he agreed. "But there's one entry, the last one she ever wrote, that's different. It's not just a memory. It's more like a set of instructions, a guide. He looked back at me, his expression earnest. She described a way to share a particular memory, a deeply cherished one. She believed that if two people with open hearts followed her instructions, they could experience it together. Not just read about it, but truly share it. My breath hitched. This was far more than I'd imagined. Sharing a memory in that way sounded impossible, like something out of a fantasy novel. Yet the conviction in James's voice, the quiet intensity in his eyes, made me hesitate to dismiss it outright. And this memory, you want to share it with me. Yes, he said simply. The entry. It's addressed to a kind soul who understands the quiet language of an empty house. When I read that, Sarah, I immediately thought of you. His words struck a chord deep within me. The quiet language of an empty house. He saw it. He understood. The fear I'd felt earlier was now transforming, morphing into something else entirely, a profound sense of being seen, of being recognized in my solitude. It was still daunting, this idea of sharing a memory so intimately, but the terrifying aspect was less about fear of harm and more about the sheer emotional depth it promised. What kind of memory is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. James looked down at his teacup, then back at me, his eyes shining with a mixture of sorrow and a strange, hopeful light. It's the memory of her last perfect day. A day before she knew she was ill. A day filled with simple joys, with light, with peace. She wanted to leave that feeling behind, a tangible piece of her happiness for someone else to experience. And she believed that sharing it would also bring a measure of peace to the one she left behind. He paused, his gaze locking with mine. To me. The air in the small kitchen felt thick with emotion. His vulnerability was a raw, open thing, and it called to something in me that had long been dormant. The idea was still outlandish, bordering on unbelievable, but the sincerity in his request, the deep emotional need underlying it, was undeniable. He wasn't just asking me to participate in something unusual. He was asking me to help him heal, and perhaps, in doing so, to find a measure of healing for myself. The terrifying part now was the thought of refusing, of turning away from such a profound human gesture, such a naked plea for connection. It was the fear of my own emotional inadequacy in the face of such a request. Could I be that kind soul? Did I have the courage and openness he spoke of? The instructions, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. What do they involve? A wave of relief washed over James's face, so profound it was almost painful to witness. They're specific, he said, a tremor in his voice. They involve sensory details, music she loved, a scent she cherished, reading her words aloud together. It's designed to be immersive, to create a space where her memory can breathe. He hesitated. It will require trust, Sarah, from both of us. Trust. There was that word again. I looked at this man, my neighbor, someone I barely knew, yet in that moment I felt a connection to him that transcended casual acquaintance. We were two souls adrift in the aftermath of loss, and he was offering a lifeline, albeit a strange and unconventional one. The rain beat harder against the windows, a frantic rhythm underscoring the quiet intensity in the room. The decision felt monumental, a true crossroads. Part of me, the cautious, sensible part, screamed to make my excuses, to retreat to the safety of my own familiar loneliness. But another part, a whisper I hadn't heard in years, urged me forward towards this terrifying, beautiful, impossible thing. It was the whisper of hope, of connection, of a life that might hold more than just echoes of the past. "All right, James," I said, the words emerging before I could second-guess them. My own voice sounded distant yet resolute. "All right. Show me Martha's memory box. Show me how to share her last perfect day." His smile, when it came, was like the sun breaking through the storm clouds. It was a smile of gratitude, of relief, and of a shared anticipation for something truly extraordinary. The terror hadn't vanished completely, but it was now tinged with a profound sense of wonder. What we were about to do felt sacred, a fragile and precious undertaking. He stood up, extending a hand not to me, but towards the hallway leading deeper into the house. "It's in the living room," he said, his voice now imbued with a quiet excitement. "She always loved the light in there, even on a stormy day like this." As I rose to follow him, I felt a shift within me, a sense of stepping into a new chapter, not just of the afternoon, but perhaps of my life. The old house around me, his house, no longer felt just like his or Martha's. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where something profound was about to unfold. The journey there was short, just a few steps down a softly lit hallway, but it felt significant. We passed a small table with a framed photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes, presumably Martha. Her smile seemed to welcome me, to approve. The living room was cozy, filled with comfortable-looking furniture, bookshelves crammed with books, and framed photographs that told the story of a life well lived. A large bay window looked out onto the rain-swept garden, the dim, stormy light casting long shadows across the room. In the center of the coffee table, placed on a beautiful embroidered cloth, was an old, ornate wooden box. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a shoebox, but it exuded an aura of importance, of cherished secrets. This, I knew, was Martha's memory box. James gestured for me to sit on the plush sofa, and he took a seat in an armchair opposite, the box between us. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes searching mine one last time. "Are you sure, Sarah? There's no pressure. It's very personal." I nodded, my throat tight with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with a powerful sense of anticipation and a strange sort of reverence. "I'm sure, James. I want to do this." He let out a slow breath, then reached for the box. His hands, though large and weathered, were surprisingly gentle as he undid the small brass clasp. The lid creaked open softly, and he lifted it, revealing the contents within. It wasn't filled with objects, as I might have half expected. Instead, it was lined with faded silk, and nestled inside were several small, leather-bound notebooks, a dried flower, a sprig of lavender, I thought, and a small, intricately carved wooden bird. And on top, a single folded piece of parchment-like paper, sealed with a wax stamp bearing the impression of a tiny hummingbird. This, I sensed, was the guide, the instructions for sharing Martha's perfect day. James carefully lifted the sealed paper. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. He unfolded it, smoothing the creases with the palm of his hand. "Her handwriting was always so beautiful," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He then looked up, his gaze holding a profound mix of sorrow and love. "It begins with a scent," he said. "She writes, 'The air must first speak of peace,' a blend of lavender and chamomile, like a warm embrace from an old friend." He then reached back into the box and retrieved a small, dark glass bottle with a stopper. She made her own essential oil blends. This was her favorite for quiet afternoons. He opened the bottle and waved it gently in the air between us. A soft, calming fragrance filled the space. Lavender, yes, but with the gentle, apple-like sweetness of chamomile, and something else, something warm and almost sunny. It was instantly soothing. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the scent wash over me. The tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders began to ease. The terrifying unknown was beginning to take on a texture of gentle care, of thoughtful preparation. Next, James said, music. She writes, let the notes be like soft rain on a parched soul. Pachelbel's canon. It was our song, the one that always brought us back to the beginning. He rose and went to an old polished wooden record player in the corner of the room. He selected a vinyl record from a shelf, his movements reverent, and soon the gentle, familiar strains of Pachelbel's canon filled the room, intertwining with the scent of lavender and chamomile. The music was beautiful, etchingly so, and I could already feel a shift in the atmosphere, a deepening sense of intimacy and shared purpose. Then he picked up one of the small leather-bound notebooks from the box. And now, her words, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She asks that we read it together. Alternating passages, if that's comfortable for you. She wanted it to be a conversation, not a monologue. He opened the notebook to a page marked with a faded silk ribbon. This is it. Her last perfect day. He looked at me, his eyes asking for my consent one more time. I nodded, a lump in my throat. This was it. We were about to step into Martha's memory. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the window, a natural percussion to the classical music, and the scent of calm enveloped us. The fear had receded, replaced by a profound sense of privilege and a quiet, trembling anticipation of the emotional journey ahead. What we were doing was indeed terrifying, not in its danger, but in its profound, unvarnished intimacy, a consensual dive into the deepest waters of human experience, guided by the loving hand of a woman I'd never met, but was beginning to feel I knew. James cleared his throat softly, his gaze fixed on the delicate script in the notebook. He began to read. The sun woke me with a gentle kiss on my eyelids, not demanding, just present. The world outside the window was painted in hues of gold and rose, and the birdsong was a symphony composed just for me. His voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of love and loss, a bittersweet melody that harmonized with the music in the room. He read about the taste of her morning coffee, the feel of her favorite worn cardigan, the quiet joy of watching the dew-kissed spiders' webs in the garden. Simple things, yet described with such tenderness, such vividness, that I could almost see them, feel them. Then he paused, looked up at me, and gestured towards the notebook. Your turn, Sarah, if you're ready. I took a breath, the scent of lavender and chamomile filling my lungs, the notes of Pachelbel washing over me. I leaned forward, my eyes finding the place on the page. Her handwriting was elegant, flowing, each letter formed with care. As I began to read, my own voice sounded strange to my ears, a little shaky at first, but then it settled, finding a rhythm with Martha's words. He brought me wildflowers from his morning walk. I read, a small, unassuming bouquet of blues and yellows, still damp with dew. Their wild, sweet scent filled the kitchen. It wasn't a special occasion. It was just Tuesday. And that, I realized, was the true gift. As I read, I glanced at James. His eyes were closed, a faint smile on his lips, as if he were living the memory alongside his wife, through her words, through my voice. A profound sense of connection flowed between the three of us, Martha, James, and me. A connection woven from words, from shared vulnerability, from the willingness to open our hearts to the beauty of a single, ordinary, perfect day. The initial fear, the apprehension about this terrifying request, had melted away completely, replaced by a deep, resonant empathy and a sense of participating in something sacred and incredibly human. We continued to read, our voices weaving together, painting a picture of a day filled with quiet laughter, gentle companionship, the beauty of nature, and the deep, unspoken love that bound two people together. It was a day of simple contentment, made extraordinary by the awareness of its preciousness. The terror was gone, and in its place was a profound, almost aching beauty, a shared emotional landscape where grief and joy, past and present, could coexist. This was the heart of the experience, the emotional core James had so hesitantly, so courageously invited me into. And as the story of Martha's perfect day unfolded, I realized this was not just her memory, but a gift, a lesson in finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, a lesson I desperately needed.